A few days ago, I watched an interview that got released on YouTube by Warren Hort from Produce Like a Pro, his YouTube channel. Great channel, by the way. I totally recommend you to subscribe to his channel if you are interested in learning a little bit more or expanding your knowledge when it comes to music production and mixing. And Steven Wilson, one of my favorite musicians ever. One of the things that I like about him is not only his great musical taste when it comes to producing music and creating fantastic songs, but also he happens to be a very good mixing engineer and a great producer at that as well. And in this conversation, they dropped several golden nuggets that I would like to discuss with you when it comes to their understanding of music and how it is being reflected and what do they think about the state of affairs in today's world when it comes to music and music production. So let's see what we can get, and I'm going to be dropping my comments along the way. So let's do it. Here we go.
I'm playing devil's advocate slightly to you there.
No, I think it's a good point.
Why would I write a song? Because they've all been written.
Well, I agree. XTC were a great example. I was used being a massive Queen fan. Queen, I think of the game. You know, we're talking about the blends. Pink Floyd did it. I mean, another Brick in the Wall Part 2 is a disco beat.
Yes, absolutely.
It's a disco beat. Another One Bites the Dust, a disco beat. One of the beauty of all the music we admire was the blending genres.
Sure. Hybrids, yeah.
And what I tend to find if I'm listening to modern rock music, it's like interchangeable with other rock bands.
Yeah.
Not only the obvious things like, oh, wow, they're all using the same kick and snare sample, which is insane.
Yeah.
How much repetition there is in that.
Yeah.
But just the formulaic kind of approach.
I happen to partially agree with what Warren is saying, because on one hand, the fact that bands back in the day used to merge different genres, for example, The Police comes to mind, and how much they implemented elements from, for example, reggae into their music, made their music unique. But in reality, it's not necessarily speaking a factor that would determine how good a band would end up becoming. Like Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow, which by the time they released their first record, they were you can consider them to be quite innovative because they were incorporating stuff that was part of classical music into a rock and roll ensemble. But if you look at it from this perspective, from today's perspective, most of what is done, particularly in metal, it's basically following the blueprint that Rainbow established in that sense. The thing is that being innovative is not necessarily something that makes or changes the game or makes you a better or worse band. It's just a feature. But what he said at the very end is what I consider to be the most important aspect. In today's modern music production world, especially when it comes to rock and radio-friendly or more mainstream rock and roll, the overuse of the same techniques and what he mentions here, the samples, it's what is actually killing the attractiveness of the genre. Every record that you hear from the last 20 years almost, from mainstream bands, they simply sound basically the same way. It's virtually impossible for you to detect who is playing just by listening to a few seconds of the track without any form of singing involved. Because usually the only differential is the singing voice. And that's if we are lucky. The solution to that is bringing back this organic feel that allow those records that they mentioned, alongside the ones that I mentioned as well, to be unique, which is trying to capture the essence of the band, not just the being innovative for sake of innovation.
It's never been harder to convince a listener to engage with something that's unfamiliar to their ears.
Yeah.
The reason for that is because of the ease of access to music and the proliferation of music. There is, whatever it is, the 180,000 songs added to Spotify every day, whatever the figure is, something crazy. Why would you engage with something that doesn't quite connect with you?
Once again, I happen to partially agree with what Steven is saying, because it's a fact that Spotify is basically flooded by new music every single day of the week. And while he's right with the fact that cutting through the noise as a new act is very, very difficult to do nowadays, what he's missing out, in my opinion, is that music is not just, and particularly rock and roll bands, is not just about the music alone. There has to be some form of mystique. What happened to the whole atmosphere and the whole image projected by bands such as Black Sabbath or Iron Maiden or Metallica for that matter? Mostly today what we see is regular dudes playing instruments, nothing fun, nothing attractive, nothing sexy about them. There's no reason for somebody who is trying to get into the rock and roll game or thing to be inspired by guys who look exactly like him. And look, I'm not saying that the image that a band portrays is everything. Of course, music is the end of the game, right? The thing is that when you don't have any form of larger-than-life persona, or at least making yourself be more than just a regular dude, you're supposed to be an artist, right? You're supposed to be someone to inspire people. You're supposed to be someone that at least somebody who's growing up could look up just to see himself as, or the artist himself, as a form of inspiration.
So the internet has made the world obviously a very small place. So any sort of innovation in music, everyone knows about it within 24 hours.
Sure.
And I think maybe, I always use the analogy of the symphonic form was something that developed over centuries, literally over centuries.
Yeah.
Symphony, or the classical music tradition developed over centuries because news traveled slowly.
Sure.
Now, an innovative record comes out, a Billie Eilish record or, any of the records you mentioned, a Kanye production or whatever it was, and suddenly the day after, everyone's copying it. Everyone's imitating a copy. So it becomes a meme, if that's the right word, it becomes a meme.
And digital means they can copy it and so much better than they could have in the past.
Yeah, I mean, quite literally copy it in some cases. They can strip out the drum break, stem separate the snare sound, whatever it is they want to do, they can literally emulate it.
In this one, I happen to be 100% with what Steven Wilson is saying, because the internet has turned everybody into an expert of some sorts. Why? One of the things that I do on these YouTube channels is showing you some of my tricks and teaching you how to do it yourself when it comes to producing music and learning the craft, of course. But I don't do it for the sake of you being able to copy exactly what I'm doing. My whole point and the whole proposition of the online persona of the band and Bardon in general and myself is to inspire you by showing you some of the things that I do so you can develop your own techniques and use whatever I show you as the stepping stone for you to develop your own sound. But what he's saying is very correct, because nowadays most people, when it comes to the whole development of music or creation of music, are always chasing their own tails, and are part of this, how can I put it, arms race to see who can copy whatever is working at the moment the best.
Every time Prince came out with a new album and a new single, I knew he was going to completely reinvent himself. Hearing Sign of the Times as the first single off that record, hearing Kiss as the first single off Parade. I mean,
when I heard Boys and Girls, so stripped down.
Yeah. Absolutely. Oh. And just, oh my God, he's done it again. He's reinvented, I mean, without wish to go into the realms of hyperbole, he's reinvented pop again. This is so far beyond, I love Quincy and Michael Jackson's records, but Prince was on another level, because he was appealing to a similar audience, but also pushing the sonic envelope. Every album reinventing himself. Now, maybe you're right, the Billie Eilish, they're kind of the equivalents of this, of this, or Tyler, the Creator, or whoever.
In this case, I think, or the interpretation that I got from what Steven is saying, is that what make Prince be different from anything released by Michael Jackson and Quincy Jones was creativity, rather than being trying to create something different. It was, simply put, the way that Prince saw music allowed him to come up with the stuff that sometimes sucked, and let's be very honest, but most of the time he landed and hit golden. Why? Because he had the balls to create something different that might not work. And it's something that is very much related to everything that we have discussed so far, because music has become formulaic for that very reason. Nobody is willing to suck. Everybody wants to play it safe. Everybody wants to just be, how can I put it, non-offensive to the audience by releasing records that they are gonna be accepted by the people. Why? Well, because it sounds like what they already liked before. That's why music is so stagnated, in my opinion. But what do you think?
And rock music has allowed itself, in a way, to be marginalized.
Right.
And in a way, you mentioned, you used the phrase, we did it to ourselves earlier on. Rock music kind of did it to itself. It became formulaic. And just in the same way that rock music kind of usurped jazz. I mean, jazz was the dominant musical form of the first half of the 20th century. Rock came along and rendered it old-fashioned, obsolete overnight. And R&B, hip-hop, electronic music, dance music did the same thing to rock. Pretty much the last great era for rock music, the 90s. Pretty much since then, rock music has become Now, I say that with the caveat that there's a band that's just come out recently called Sleep Token, a British band who have had a #1 Billboard album and a #1 British album and are massive and they're amazing. But to me, there's something about their music that sounds closer to K-pop than it does to Black Sabbath. And that's a really interesting development.
The so-called death of rock music, it's a beast that has many heads, in my opinion. There are many more things that are at play that Steven didn't mention. And one of them is, of course, how much rock music is being promoted in mainstream media. If you stop to think about it, what is promoted is usually what becomes popular. And something happened during the early 2000s in which, well, rock music was simply taken out of the web, of the airwaves, if you think about it. But I'm going to stop there because that could take us into the conspiracy territory aspect of the conversation. But what I want to point out is actually what he says is correct. Rock music cornered itself into becoming this pariah. And I think it's not just out of the whole notion of it not being popular anymore. There is a good point to be made regarding the elitism that was created around the fan bases of certain genres. I'm looking at metal, for example, that true movement that kind of isolates people from enjoying a band just because if it becomes popular, the band it will end up sucking just by the mere virtue of them becoming sellouts. In my opinion, that simply stopped the development and actually the reach of new bands, or the expansion of new bands, by simply not promoting them through the word of mouth. Also, another thing that I think happens is that rock music has a very, very influential element to it when it comes to the development of culture. If you think about it, one of the core elements of music or of rock music in this particular case is or at least used to be back in the day, is the enshrinement of those who become good at their instrument. For example, the virtuosos everywhere. And virtuoso can be someone like Yngwie Malmsteen, which happens to be a beast on guitar, but also you can make the claim that David Gilmour is also a virtuoso on guitar. Even though he's way slower than Yngwie Malmsteen, and even his musical phrases are a little bit more conservative if you think about it. But what makes both musicians to be placed as virtuosos in their instruments? Well, their prowess. One of them could be a reference for technical prowess, while David Gilmour could be a reference of musical prowess. Both of them have their place in music, and rock music has always pushed that envelope forward. And if you stop to think about it, our culture has stopped promoting beauty and virtue on every regard. Most of what we hear, most of what we see online is usually mediocre at best and terrible at worst. And it's become the norm. And I think that's one of the biggest problems that we're facing at a cultural level. This is not just related to music, because if you start to think about it as well, you'll see that movies happen to be suffering of the same symptoms, and also you'll see that plenty of even video games as well are sucking so much today due to the fact that nobody's actually promoting and pushing excellence. So, tell me what do you think about that, because I think that's the biggest problem in music and in rock music for that matter, and if we expand it a bit more, the entirety of our culture today. So this is a conversation to get started, so feel free to leave your comments on the comment section down below, and also if you happen to like or agree with what I said, please like the like button, and if you don't like it, well, don't like it, but this is just me sharing my opinions online, what could go wrong, of course. So, as usual, as every single time I meet you, I gotta remind you that you should never let anybody tell you what to dream about. And remember that I will see you when I see you.